Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity. This is quite a hard theory for a lot of people to understand, particularly because there are so many misunderstandings about the word gender. So I'm going to try and explain this in as easy to understand a way as possible. So the first thing we need to know is what gender actually means. There is a difference between the words gender, biological sex and sexuality. So it's important to make sure that you understand the difference. So biological sex is to do with things like your reproductive organs, your DNA and your genitals. So for example, if you have an XX chromosome and you have female external genitalia and female reproductive organs, then you could be considered biologically to be female. The difference between that and gender is that gender, people often use gender to mean biological sex, and when they talk about it they confuse those two terms, when actually when they're talking about gender they often mean biological sex. Gender is a different term which is a social construct. Gender is almost like how you feel inside or how you behave. Do you behave in a more feminine way? Do you behave in a more masculine way? Do you consider yourself to be female or male in your brain? You know, your chemistry in your brain, does that feel more female or masculine? So that is what gender means. But like I say, people confuse those two terms. So when Judith Butler talks about her theory, she talks particularly about gender, the way people feel. And what she basically says is that gender and the way we feel in terms of feeling male or feeling female is a construct based on what we do. So that we can perform certain actions or behaviours that construct our feelings of gender. So she thinks, for example, that particular behaviours for females might be things like putting on makeup, wearing high heels or dresses, things that we would consider to be female in terms of a gender. These are behaviours, and that if you repeat these behaviours, if you perform these tasks every day, it creates your idea of what it is to be female. And it is about doing these tasks on a daily basis or on a regular basis. If you just do them once, that doesn't construct your gender. But if you are performing these things as rituals, if you're performing them more regularly, perhaps that is going to affect your ideas about gender. So if, for example, you are somebody that was brought up in a typical masculine way in terms of gender and behaviours, if you were playing football, if you were seeing men drink beer, if you were hearing swearing or aggressive behaviour, if you heard people or heard other men talking about women in perhaps quite sexist ways, then perhaps you might grow up believing that those are male performances that you have to put on to be masculine. So gender, in her view, is all about a performance, rituals that you perform on a reasonably regular basis that affect your views of what it is to be female or male in terms of gender. Now, the way this applies to your media products, and this is where it kind of is hard for students sometimes to understand, is to have a look at your media products. Let's take Zoella, for example, for online media, and see whether or not you think her behaviour, her repeated rituals construct a certain idea about what it is to be female. So in her vlogs, we see her repeatedly putting on makeup, discussing makeup, talking about shoes, about clothes, about spa days. She talks about very traditional feminine behaviours, and she repeats these as rituals over and over again in her videos. And so perhaps her vlogs and her online site and her YouTube channel are constructing those ideas about gender identity, in particular for women. They are teaching girls about these behaviours that you have to repeat and ritualise in order to be more feminine. Have a think about Hukka magazine if you're studying that for component 2 for the magazine section. In the Beyond Binary section, for example, where they interview Arabia Felix and Jacob Tovia, consider the ways in which those two particular people that they've interviewed are constructing their own gender identities by performing certain rituals. So Arabia Felix talks about vlogging, talks about putting on makeup, talks about dressing in what he terms drag, and he talks about those things constructing his identity, the performance of those rituals that are typically associated with being female. Arabia Felix has adopted to construct their own identity, to make them feel more or less female or masculine, and similar with Jacob Tobia. Jacob Tobia in the article describes himself as sort of gender non-binary or gender queer, and in the article it refers to Jacob Tobia as they. They use the they pronoun, and Jacob Tobia dresses in quite typically female clothing. They wear makeup, jewellery. So perhaps Jacob Tobia is using these performances, these rituals, to construct their identity, and to sort of maybe take away their traditional masculinity and construct themselves as being something kind of almost in between, that doesn't conform to these two binary stereotypes of gender. So this is quite a complicated theory, but it's worth just having a look at any of your set texts or practicing with unseen products and working out whether or not you think gender has been constructed through a performance of feminine or masculine behaviours. Are they kind of implying that you must do these particular rituals, these particular behaviours in order to feel more female or masculine in terms of your gender identity? And if so, that's something that perhaps you might be able to apply Butler to.